Hi, I'm Tracey Shearer, and thank you so much for coming back to our next storytelling episode on this journey as we talk about the importance of storytelling, how it can connect us and build empathy, and why it's just been around for forever, how powerful it is. And what we're going to talk about today is storytelling in the area of books, which most of us are familiar with, but also business, social media, and in life. So when we think about storytelling in books, that's pretty easy for most of us to grasp. We're reading a book, whether or not, when you think about, say, genre fiction, so a mystery, a suspense, a thriller, or my books that are a collection of different genres like fantasy and suspense and thrillers and women's fiction and all that thrown in together. You're going along on a journey with the characters. There's a plot that takes you through, and there are changes that happen throughout the book to those characters. There's usually an outer struggle as well as an inner struggle. So, what I mean by the outer struggle and the inner struggle when it comes to the storytelling factors is the outer struggle would be, let's take Star Wars. So, that would be the outer struggle would be we've got to stop the Empire from destroying the galaxy, destroying where the rebels are, and then moving on and doing that to other worlds. That's the big outer struggle. We've got to get there and do this. Outer struggles could be we've got to find the artifact in order to save the world. We've got to get this back to this one place and time before a bomb explodes. We've got to do all of these other things, these big picture things. James Bond is great for that, right? There's always like this big, thing that they're trying to prevent or stop, or a big villain or whatnot. Then there's the inner struggle piece. And the inner struggle, when it comes to storytelling, is how those changes and things that are happening to your characters inside. So you're familiar with the fact that many, many, many stories begin with what we call a reluctant hero. They don't want to go off and save the world. They don't want to go off and do their chosen one duty. They don't want to go off and be drafted into rescuing somebody or whatever it is. They don't want to. They're reluctant. They put up a lot of barriers. They put everything in the way. They're like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then, of course, they go do it, right? Because that's part of the story. But what happens is, especially in the really good stories, is there's a transformation that happens with that character. So they might go through it saying, no, I don't want to do it. And it's usually other reasons that are causing them to say that. It could be fear. It could be a feeling of inadequacy. It could be that they've been hurt so many times in life that they don't want to take this chance on whatever it is. It could be a lot of different reasons. And then by the end of the book or the movie or the story, they've transformed and they've grown. Doesn't mean they're 100% fixed, so to speak. But what it means is that they have changed and transformed, and their inner journey has shifted them. And so there's always that inner and outer. So when it comes to Star Wars, Luke wanted to get off Tatooine, but there's no way Luke ever thought at that point, I'm going to go off and, trust the Force, which I don't even know what the heck that is, right? At that point, he didn't. And I'm going to be able to destroy the Death Star. That I would feel confident enough to do that. You know what I mean? For him at that point. But as all of the different changes happen throughout the movie, he gets to the point where he changes and gains that confidence, but he also realizes how important it is that he's doing what he's doing, that there's something greater than himself. And that's the shift, the inner shift. And the reason why those things work so well in storytelling, especially for fiction, is because you are along for that journey as the reader. You're emotionally involved. And so when all of those things happen at the end, whether or not somebody dying or somebody succeeding and saving the day, whatever it is, you feel it. You're invested. Books that are trying to talk about some really tough topics, maybe at the end of it, you're crying because you're so invested, and maybe then you're looking at things differently. who knows what it is, but it's that whole journey, that inner and outer journey that they take you on. Now, for things like memoir and personal development books, remember we talked about the message and what's your message in those types of books? How do you want the reader to feel at the end? And so, again, you're taking somebody on a journey through the storytelling. And you're also getting that emotional investment from them when they're reading your book, because they're either identifying with you, they're feeling for you, they're empathizing with you, they're angry with you over whatever happened. There's that connection. And so you're still taking them, even though it's not fiction, you're still taking them on that journey. You're still getting them emotionally invested and going along for the ride that you're taking them on, and leaving them with whatever feeling you want, or leaving them feeling like they can take your 5 steps to weight loss, whatever it is. So that's storytelling that we are pretty much familiar with when it comes to, say, books or movies or whatnot. So in business, how does storytelling apply to business? Well, you might think, okay, well, I understand you could use examples, right? Think about storytelling as examples. Very true. One of the things that I found that is so powerful is building the story for a client to get them to understand why you're suggesting whatever you're suggesting, why you are advocating whatever you're advocating, because you're explaining to them how everything fits together. So for me, I've been in the insurance business for a long time. I love to use storytelling to help my clients understand risk scenarios. So it's not just like, oh, well, if this happened, then you'd have the coverage. A fire burn your place down. Most people understand that stuff, right? Fire burn your place down, you have insurance coverage, it replaces it. Where you really need storytelling, I found, are in the really nuanced coverages that people don't always understand the implications of, or the exposures they might have, or a scenario or a situation that they haven't thought of before. And when you bring that up through the use of storytelling, they really get invested and immersed in what you're saying. And they also have that emotional connection. How is that going to feel when XYZ happens? And it also helps them understand why you're presenting whatever you're presenting, because it's important. Even if they decide they don't want to go that route, they understand it much better with a story than throwing a bunch of insurance jargon at them or whatever business you're in. So think about using storytelling when it comes to business. Now, you can also use storytelling when it comes to the marketing aspect. And any of you that are in marketing know this as well. We've all seen the commercials that take you along on this little journey. You know, I always love those little coffee commercials where somebody's coming home for Christmas and you don't know if they're going to get home, and then they come home unexpectedly, and then there's coffee and stuff and everybody's hugging and stuff. It's this little kind of journey that they take you on. They get you emotionally invested. There's even lately now I've seen on TV here for Virginia Mason, these wonderful little ads where they've got these 2 little kids that are hockey players, and they look like they're like 4 or 5, tiny little guys, and they're out on the ice, and one of them goes down and the other one comes over and helps them up, and they're playing this like uplifting song in the background, and I'm just like, oh. And the same type of thing where they're undoing some rope around, I think it's a whale or something, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm invested. And the product that they're selling is Virginia Mason, the hospital and the services. But we've seen products, like I said, the coffee products. There's tons of things where they build the experience, that story around the product. So storytelling is used all the time in marketing. The other area I've seen this really help in business is when you're coaching and mentoring your teammates. Because if you just tell somebody you do X and then you do Y and then you do this, okay, they know the steps, but they don't understand why it's so important. And for many of us, we get busy and we just want to say, do this, do this, do this. But when you spend the time and you explain to somebody the importance of what they're doing, how it impacts the clients, how it helps the company, how it helps them to show their expertise. When you're explaining all those things to somebody about why they're doing something, they tend to get more invested in it. And they could even have an emotional reaction to it. I've had teammates before where I've explained some different storytelling scenarios and some important things, and they're like, oh my God, I never thought somebody would think that when they're looking at this work product. I don't want them to think that. Exactly. So when you're coaching and mentoring people, storytelling is huge because it gets the person that you're trying to help into the mindset. They're along for the ride in the journey, and you're explaining to them the importance of what they're doing or why we're doing it, or whatever it is that you're helping them with. Stories work. So those are some of those areas that you can use for business. Now, social media, we see stuff all the time on social media, don't we? Some good, some bad. I tend to find that I see repetitive stuff on social media. And what I mean by that is that everybody they try to throw out something that happened to them that is traumatic or whatnot, but they're sticking surface. Remember, I was telling you that before on a previous episode, is that you don't want to stay on the surface. You want to get and dig deep. The reason why is because you're unique, and your experience when you went through whatever it is that you went through makes your experience unique, your story unique, your viewpoint, how you handled it, all that type of stuff. So I don't want to just hear that you went through something. I want to understand. If you're really trying to pull me in on social media, which is, well, I'm talking about people that are using it not just for like, hey, this happened and I'm sharing it with my friends. I'm talking about people that use social media also for their business, right? So they're trying to attract you to their coaching. They're trying to attract you to their product. They're trying to attract you to take their course, whatever it is. And how they want to pull you in is through their stories, which is great. Great use of storytelling. But a lot of times people just slap those headlines out there, and they're not thinking about what they're really saying or the impact. And they're also not necessarily taking you on a full story. In the next episode, we're going to talk about some tips and tricks to help you guys out when you are on social media and posting stuff. So remember, when you're on social media, I'm not saying you have to throw your heart out there if you're not comfortable, because you have to figure out what you're comfortable with when you're using social media for your business, because you tend to put those types of posts to public. Anybody could see them. You got to be okay with some of the stuff that could come back. And some people are not very nice. Let's just put it that way. Even if they don't agree with what you're saying and stuff, there are some people that are just really, really vocal about it, which can be very hurtful when you have become vulnerable and put yourself out there. So think about how you want to put the information out there for your story, how vulnerable you want to get. But I suggest, though, giving some details, giving some insight, even if you hold some of it back. Really let people understand who you are. We talked about the like, know, and trust factor before. And why I mention that now is that social media is the perfect example of that like, know, and trust. So I've had friends before that are now friends that I saw on social media. They were coaches. And I started seeing their posts, and I was like, okay, I think I kind of like them. I'm gonna get into their orbit a little bit more. Maybe I'm gonna join their group. Maybe I'm gonna check out a few of their blog posts or other things. And then I start to get to know them, because they're posting about what's happening to them. They're not just saying like, I'm on the beach making millions of dollars. They're actually telling me about their life, their struggles, their dog, their cat, their kids, whatever it is. They're sharing their stories. They're being a little bit more vulnerable. So I'm getting to know them. And then as I get to like them and know them, I start to trust them, because I'm seeing what they're putting out there. But I wouldn't even be there to trust them if I didn't already like them and get to know them. And that's where those stories become key, because you're bringing people into your funnel, as they talk about, for you to present whatever it is you're going to present, as you are the expert on trauma help or weight loss, or for me, writing, because I'm an intuitive storytelling coach. There's a lot of things where people have seen me from my books. So they're like, oh, I kind of like her. I kind of like her post. And they're like, oh, she's a cancer survivor. And there's other things that she's talking about here. And oh, look at her rescue kitties. And then, and then they're like trusting me to help them write a book. But they wouldn't be there if I hadn't already been vulnerable and shared stuff in my posts on social media. This also goes for video on social media too. So it doesn't have to just be the written word. It can also be whatever you're putting out, your lives or whatnot on social media or on Instagram. And I find that when you do those different steps and actually put yourself out there, that you do get that like, know, and trust. And then that helps with building your client base. And the way you do that is through stories. It's great to put educational posts together with a story. So why are you sharing with people about how you know to do this or that? Well, it's because you went through this over here and you're explaining it. I went through this, so now I know how to do X. And I never thought I could do this before, but I pulled myself out. Now I did this, and that's my story. So social media can be a great way for you to reach a lot more people and be able to present what I call like little micro stories, because you're not going to get into a big long thing on a social media post. You can get into longer ones on lives, but you've got to make sure to keep people's attention. And we're going to talk about that in the tips and tricks episode about how to go ahead and, stop that scroll, maybe keep things a little bit shorter, what to keep, what to cut. And we can do some of that because I see so many missed opportunities on social media. It's just amazing the types of things I say. I'm like, oh my God, this could have been so good. Or then somebody takes me through this whole thing and I'm like on board. I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then the payout is like, meh. So I tell you, it's great for those of you who love to do like the clickbait thing. But if you don't have a payoff at the end, people are not going to read your posts after that. I never read that gal's any of her other posts because she let me down. I was like, nope, there's a lot more people to look at on social media. And I didn't know her because we didn't get into the like, no part yet. We were just getting into the, I was scrolling around social media. So you want somebody to be scrolling around and going, oh, who's that? And then they start looking at more of your posts. Or then they start checking out your other stuff on your page or on your Instagram feed or on Twitter. I have a huge Twitter following. Twitter is fabulous for building relationships. And I know sometimes I've had people go, what do you mean about, what are you talking about? Twitter. I don't get Twitter. Either people get Twitter or they don't get Twitter. But my thing is, I've found is that people aren't very harsh on Twitter in general, right? You get some of the harsh people, but in general, the communities that I'm part of on Twitter are very supportive. Now I go to some writer Facebook groups and some of them are awful. They're just tearing apart the writer who has posted mean things, really mean. I go onto LinkedIn and I see somebody like will post this cute little video about something and people are tearing it apart. Like, well, did you realize that, XYZ and this happened and that happened and the person whose dog that belongs to did blah, 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 blah. And it just becomes this like awful thing. People are really ruthless on LinkedIn. I never realized it before. So if you haven't done Twitter before, I highly suggest checking out Twitter. It's definitely interesting. You're going to see so many different things on there. You've got only a certain amount of characters for your post, which makes you think about what you're saying. It's like when you write a short story as a writer, when I had to write my first ever short story and I had to think about the word count, it really makes every word count. And there's lots of different people that you can run into on Twitter. So I've built a really good following of writers and readers and those types of things. And it's fun because it is just I almost feel like it's little snapshots. So you can use storytelling on Twitter as well. It's going to make you think about how you do it. And you can also, I found, tell a story very effectively with a picture as well. So you can use storytelling on Twitter, you can use storytelling on LinkedIn, you can use storytelling anywhere on social media. But just think about the fact that it's bite-sized, right? And people have short attention spans on social media. So you really want to make sure that you're putting together your posts effectively. And like I said, we're going to talk about that in the next episode. But storytelling is a great way to get people to look at your services, to get to know you, to buy your books, to buy your products, to maybe be interested in your company. If you're recruiting, whatever it is, storytelling you can use on there as well. All right. So we've talked about storytelling in books and movies, that type of thing. We've talked about storytelling in business, and then the segue into social media, because that's what we're talking about with business, is the use of social media. Because I tell you, with COVID, so many people are using social media now to reach people, and so many virtual things now than there ever were before. So social media has exploded in that respect. There's also storytelling in life, right? So not only like business and books and that type of thing, but there's also storytelling in life. So we talked a little bit about the connections and building empathy. Storytelling is great for building relationships. And you do this without thinking about it. Most of us, when we find somebody that we like, and I don't have, whether it's romantic or friendly, right? Think about, like, I always think about like your little best friends when you're in school, and maybe it's you played a game with somebody and you really liked them and they're funny, or they laughed at your jokes or whatever. We tend to open up and tell stories to those people. We're not just telling them I'm fine. We're telling them what's going on. We're telling them how we're feeling. When something happens that's bad, we're reaching out to them and we're telling them the whole story about what happened and how we feel. It connects us even more deeply with those that we already care about. But stories are a great way to build new relationships. So I am in a new job just recently, and I found myself, without even thinking about it, telling more stories to people that I'm just meeting for the first time, as opposed to saying, oh, I was born in New York. And maybe I talk about, instead of just saying that, say, yeah, I grew up in New York. It was so great. We had the 4 seasons. And that was one of the reasons why I really was interested in moving to Seattle, because I had lived in Southern California for a long time. And I really missed that change in seasons. But I tell you, I didn't want the extreme change in seasons, because that winter is crazy in New York. And I still remember when my mom used to put me in the snowsuit that like came up to here when I was little, with the suspenders. I could hardly move. I felt like a little for those of you who've seen Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I felt like the gal who blew up to the balloon, or not the balloon, the blueberry. And I felt like her. And so it was funny. But anyway, so I'm telling them a little bit more stuff like that, as opposed to, I grew up in New York and I moved to California, then I moved to Seattle. And when we're building relationships with people, we tend to tell the stories of our lives and of our experiences, which tell us something about us, them, kind of how are they responding to it? What are they saying back? Are they sharing a story? And remember, I mentioned that me as a storyteller, if I'm telling you a story, I'm revealing things about myself. And then also your reactions are feeding into, like, well, did they laugh at that? Did they say that they had an experience similar to it? Are they like, that's interesting. Do you have a stapler I can use? You know what I mean? So the use of storytelling really does engage the other person, and you get those reactions back. So you can build and assess a relationship. You can keep a relationship going strongly, whether or not it's friendship or romantic, by the stories that you share and tell. It's amazing. Plus, building, like I said, the empathy factor, the fact that people will share what they've gone through. Say if you're watching like 60 Minutes, or you're watching the news or whatever, and you hear about the things that people have gone through. Like I was just watching something on, I think it was 60 Minutes, regarding septic tanks and the lack thereof in this particular small county in the South. And I was shocked of some of the stuff I was seeing. I was like, what is going on here? Well, these people telling their stories, I felt for them because they were just coming out and saying what was going on and how they had struggled and how they had tried, and they couldn't get any, and now they're living in filth and all this other type of stuff. And it's amazing because I would have never even thought about that. But because somebody was able to tell their story and share it, I'm now aware of what's going on there and going, oh my gosh, and thinking about things differently, like being very grateful for what I have, wondering why things aren't different there. Why is that happening? You know, there's lots of different things that can come up from people sharing their stories in life. They're not sharing it to make a buck. Sure, the news program is sharing the story, but I'm talking about those people telling their story. Many people are telling their story because they need help. They need somebody to hear them. They need things to change. And if they can tell their story and take you on that journey and make you emotionally connected, then they can help build change, which is why they always say how powerful the word is. That revolutions, it's not the people fighting necessarily, it's the idea, it's the spirit of it. That's what carries people through. It's that story people are invested in. People replaying something in their head. This can never happen again, ever. You've seen those, you know what I'm talking about. And there's might be things that have happened in your life where you're like, this can never, ever happen to anybody else again. This is why I have to tell my story. This is why I have to do my thing. Because stories build that empathy, that connection. They change minds, they change lives. So whether or not you're using storytelling in a book or movie, memoir, personal development, nonfiction, whatever it is, or you're using it in business, social media, or you're using it in life, storytelling filters through everything we do. It's some of the essential glue that binds us together. And there are many different areas that you can use storytelling in that we haven't even touched on that you might think of. And so the next time, I want to challenge you, the next time when you're at your job, or maybe your full-time job is writing or is doing something like, more exciting, where maybe you're not necessarily in a corporate type of a situation. Though corporate jobs can be very interesting, I have to say. People are like, how do you do a corporate job and write? Well, because I'm in insurance, I'm always doing the what if questions, right? I'm always going, well, what if this happened and then this happened and this happened? Do they have the coverage? I'm always thinking about that stuff. So I'm creative and working it out all the time. But there might be different areas that you're in where you might not have thought to use storytelling. So try it. Try it and see how it works, and see if it shifts things. See if somebody gets an idea even faster than before. See if you get a buy-in on something. Like you're in a meeting with people, or you're part of a committee, and you present the story, and people are like, that's a great idea, let's do it. See how you can use it to help illustrate what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're striving for, to get people to understand and connect and feel what you're feeling. Because I tell you, when you do that, and when you get, as I said, that lean in, I'm leaning in to tell you, you're leaning in to listen, it's amazing what magic can happen and what change can happen. So I hope this helped give you some ideas on how you can use storytelling and where storytelling is being used. And we are going to talk about tips and tricks to help you as you're doing your storytelling. So make sure to tune into that. And I hope that you guys are just brimming with ideas. And until next time, I will see you later. Thanks.